Boone shielded the trembling girl from a mob of furious townsfolk at dawn. Flames from their torches cast wild shadows on a half-built gallows and its dangling noose. 70 voices roared for blood, but Boone's heart thundered with defiant outrage. He stood between the mob and the innocent healer they'd branded a witch, a stand that could cost him his life by sunrise. With minutes left until daybreak, the noose swayed above the dusty ground and the circle of villagers tightened. Would mercy or madness rule this dawn? How had a humble ranch cook ended up facing his entire town alone? 12 hours earlier, Boone stirred a simmering stew in the Red Creek Ranch cookhouse when a ranch hand burst in, eyes wide with panic. They caught Clara, the healer. Pastor's boy died, and folks are calling her a witch. They're fixin' to hang her at dawn. Boone's blood ran cold. Clara was a gentle soul who used herbs to help the sick. He remembered how she'd nursed Mr. Cartwright, the ranch owner, through fever last winter. Now fear and grief had turned the town against her. Boone grabbed his hat and revolver. Mentor and ranch owner Samuel Cartwright limped over, concern etched on his face. "Son, think careful," Samuel warned in a low voice. Facing down a mob ain't safe. Boone's jaw clenched as he buckled on his gun belt. "They'll kill an innocent girl. I won't let that happen." Samuel saw the determination in Boone's eyes and nodded grimly. He hitched his horse. "Then I'm riding with you." They galloped into Pinewood Falls under a bruise-purple dusk sky. Lightning forked in the distance as they spurred their horses faster, hearts pounding with worry. In the town square, dozens of villagers crowded around a hastily built gallows frame. Clara stood on a wagon bed beneath it, hands tied in front of her, and cheeks stained with tears. At the sight of Boone and Samuel pushing through the crowd, her eyes widened in desperate relief. "Stand aside," Boone shouted, positioning himself at Clara's side. Some in the mob pressed forward with hateful glares, but the sight of respected Samuel Cartwright at Boone's shoulder gave them pause. Pastor Jim, red-eyed and shaking, aimed a finger at Clara. "She bewitched my boy. We'll have justice at sunrise," he cried. Boone raised his hands placatingly. "Neighbors, listen, you all know Clara. She tried to save that child." A few townsfolk murmured, uncertain. Seeing the hesitation, Samuel added firmly, "We'll keep her under guard till morning. Give the Lord time to guide your judgment." There was a long beat of silence punctuated by Clara's muffled sob. An elder or two in the crowd nodded at Pastor Jim. Finally, the grief-stricken preacher lowered his head. "Till dawn," he spat. "Then we'll see God's will done." A low rumble of thunder echoed as Boone and Samuel untied Clara's ropes. They half-carried her away from the gallows. The crowd parted sullenly to let them pass, some villagers hurling muttered threats. Boone kept himself between Clara and those angry stares. He felt the fury in those people he'd known for years, and it sent a chill through him. As they reached their horses, he helped Clara up into his saddle. She was shaking with fear and exhaustion. Boone squeezed her bond-reddened hands gently. "You're safe with us now," he whispered. Clara choked back a sob and managed a faint nod. But over her shoulder, Boone caught a last glimpse of the mob in the square, faces twisted by grief and superstition, and his gut churned. They had won a few hours of life for her, but by sunrise, that crowd would demand Clara back for the hangman's rope. Boone set his jaw as lightning cracked overhead. He had to find a way to save her before time ran out. Subscribe now to Wild West Love Stories for more untamed frontier adventures. By the time Boone guided his horse back through the ranch gates, the storm had dwindled to a cold drizzle. He and Samuel hurried Clara into the ranch's dimly lit cookhouse. Inside, the familiar scent of soot and overcooked stew clung to the air. Boone's stew from earlier now burnt to the pot. Clara shivered violently, rainwater dripping from her hair onto the plank floor. Boone wrapped a wool blanket around her thin shoulders. Her lips were pale and chattering, but she managed a grateful glance. The only sounds were Clara's ragged breaths and the crackle of dying embers in the stove. Boone knelt and stirred those embers back to life, adding kindling until a small flame took. "We're safe for now," he said softly, though he wasn't sure it was true. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Only a few hours remained until dawn. Clara winced as Samuel carefully cut the ropes binding her wrists. Angry red welts marred her skin. Boone's gut twisted at the sight. He gently ladled lukewarm water from a kettle onto a clean rag. The tinny smell of boiled water mingled with the scorched stew. "This might sting," he warned. Clara nodded, allowing him to dab her burns with the damp cloth. She hissed in pain, and Boone's jaw tightened. Each bruise on her was evidence of the town's fear. "I'm sorry," he murmured, eyes stinging with frustration. Clara met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved my life. I can endure the rest." Her courage only made Boone more determined. A sudden bang rattled the door. Clara flinched, clutching the blanket. Boone and Samuel exchanged alarmed looks. It was near 1 a.m., too early for the mob, unless they'd broken their word. Boone grabbed his rifle from a wall hook, heart thudding. "Boone, open up!" A voice growled from outside. Through the rain-streaked window, he saw the bobbing glow of a lantern and two shadowy figures on the porch. Samuel rested a hand on Boone's arm. "Careful, son." Boone lifted the latch. The door flew open, wind gusting in with a spray of drizzle. Two of Pinewood Falls' townsmen stood there, armed and grim-faced. One was Deputy Harlan, a lanky man gripping a shotgun. Beside him loomed Big Roy, one of Royce's ranch hands, lantern in one hand and a revolver in the other. The sharp odor of wet wool and horse sweat rolled off them. "We're here for the witch," Deputy Harlan declared, voice hard. Without waiting for an invitation, they shoved into the cookhouse. Boone stepped between them and Clara, rifle pointed at the floor, but finger tense on the trigger. "She's under our protection," he said, steel in his tone. The agreement was to wait until morning. Rain drummed on the roof as if to punctuate his words. Big Roy sneered, eyes flicking to Clara huddled by the stove. "Royce figured you'd pull something sneaky," he spat. Water dripped from his hat brim onto the floorboards. "We ain't waiting. Hand her over now." Samuel raised his hands placatingly. "Harlan, listen," the old rancher urged over the patter of rain. "The girl's hurt and half drowned from the ride. At least let her rest." The deputy cut him off by cocking his shotgun with a loud click. Clara gasped. "Shut it, old man!" Harlan barked, his mustache twitching. "I'm taking her back to town tonight." Lightning flashed in the distant sky, casting brief, stark light through the doorway. Boone's pulse thundered in his ears. He recognized the wild-eyed panic behind the deputy's anger, a fear of what they didn't understand. "You'll have to go through me first," Boone said quietly, stepping fully in front of Clara. He leveled his rifle at Harlan's chest. Both intruders froze. They all knew Boone was a crack shot. Tension coiled in the room, tight as a noose. The only sound was the rain on the roof and Clara's frightened breath. Big Roy's face contorted with contempt. "Have you lost your mind, Boone? You'd turn outlaw again for a witch," he snarled. His finger twitched near his revolver's trigger. Boone's rifle swung toward him in warning. "I won't let you harm her," Boone answered, voice low and unyielding. He felt Clara grip the back of his coat, a plea and trust in that touch. For a heartbeat, nobody moved, and Deputy Harlan lunged forward, swinging the butt of his shotgun at Boone. The crack of wood against Boone's rifle echoed as he parried the blow. Clara cried out. In a blur, Big Roy charged too, grappling for Boone's weapon. Boone drove an elbow into Roy's ribs, drawing a grunt of pain. The cookhouse erupted into chaos, boots scuffling on wood, the sour smell of unwashed men, and fear filling the air. Samuel tried to intervene, stepping between Harlan and Boone. "Stop this," the old rancher shouted. Harlan shoved Samuel aside. The old man stumbled against the table, knocking over a tin plate with a clatter. Boone saw Samuel collapse to one knee, clutching his side. Fury flared in Boone's chest. The deputy raised his shotgun again, but Boone was faster. He swung the rifle butt up, catching Harlan under the chin with a thud. The deputy fell backward into a shelf of pantry goods, cans and jars, toppling onto him. Big Roy cursed and threw a wild punch at Boone's head. Boone ducked, the blow glancing off his shoulder. He retaliated with a solid strike of his rifle stock into Roy's gut. The big man doubled over with a wheeze. Boone seized Roy by the collar and bodily hauled him toward the door. Rain sprayed their faces as Boone roared, "Get off my land," and hurled Big Roy out into the mud. The man sprawled on the ground, coughing for breath. Inside, Harlan scrambled up from the spilled flour and beans, jaw bleeding and eyes wild. He grabbed for his fallen shotgun, but found Samuel's boot pressing down on it. The elderly rancher glared, voice deadly calm. "You heard him? Get." Harlan hesitated, blood trickling from a cut on his chin. He looked past Boone to Clara, who stood trembling by the stove, with a cast-iron skillet clutched in her hands for defense. Something like shame flickered in the deputy's eyes as he realized they were outmatched and in the wrong. Harlan staggered to the door, helping Big Roy to his feet. The deputy spat a mix of blood and rain. "You've made a damn mistake, Boone," he snarled, retreating. "When Royce and the rest hear about this, you're finished." Big Roy regained enough wind to sneer. "We'll be back with 20 men." Boone stood in the doorway, rifle aimed into the darkness. "Go, before I change my mind and put you both in the ground," he growled. His silhouette, backlit by the orange glow of the hearth, looked like the Reaper himself for an instant. Harlan and Roy stumbled into the rainy night, cursing. Their lantern zigzagged away toward the trail. Boone exhaled shakily and dropped the bar across the door again. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat. His heart thundered in his chest. Inside the dim kitchen, Clara stood rooted in place, eyes huge with fear. "They won't stop," she whispered. Boone's throat tightened at the truth of it, but he forced a reassuring nod. He cracked open his revolver cylinder to check his ammunition. Only a couple of rounds remained. Outside, lightning flickered over the plains, and he imagined he heard a distant shout on the wind. The threat was far from over. Through the rattling window, Boone could already see flickers of distant torches gathering in the hills. Time was running out fast. They moved Clara to a hay barn at the far edge of the ranch for safety. Boone lit a hooded lantern in the barn's corner, casting soft light over the stacks of hay. Clara sank onto a bale, pulling a blanket tight around her shoulders. "I'm sorry you're in danger because of me," she whispered. Boone knelt before her. "None of this is your fault," he said firmly. "They're just scared." Clara's eyes glistened. In halting words, she revealed how fear had destroyed her life once before. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the barn's eaves. Clara's painful words hung in the dusty air, as if the night itself listened. As a child, she'd watched her mother, also a healer, get accused of witchcraft when a fever took lives in their village. Superstitious men burned their home. Clara escaped with scars on her heart that never healed. "I tried only to help," she said, voice trembling. "But everywhere I go, if something goes wrong, I'm called the witch." Boone gently took her hand. "You're not alone this time," he assured. Clara squeezed his fingers. "Why risk everything for me?" she asked softly. Boone glanced away. "I've done bad things in my past," he admitted. He once rode with outlaws, and violence had been his trade until it cost him dearly. "My best friend Clay went to prison because of me," Boone said, shame in his eyes. "After that, I hung up my guns, swore never to harm innocents again. He had tried for years to bury that guilt, but it still haunted him at night." He managed a rueful smile. "Maybe by helping you, I can atone." Clara's grip tightened. For the first time, she realized Boone's wounds ran as deep as her own. Before Boone could say more, an orange glow flickered through the cracks in the barn wall. He stood, heart lurching. Dozens of torches snaked down the ridge toward the ranch. The mob was coming early, under cover of darkness. Boone blew out the lantern. In the darkness, Clara felt Boone's arm tense around her. Across the field, rough voices echoed through the night. The final storm was about to break. Boone drew a sharp breath. "Stay behind me, no matter what," he whispered. Clara nodded, pressing close as the first furious shouts rang out from the yard. A chorus of shouts and torchlight announced the mob's arrival around the barn. Torch flames whipped in the wind as the crowd roared, "Hang the witch!" Over and over, a chant that sent a chill through Boone. Boone stepped out to face them. Pastor Jim stood at the front, pistol shaking in his hand. "Bring out the witch," he demanded. Behind him, Royce held a noose aloft. Clara peered from a gap in the wall, heart pounding. Boone raised his hands, trying to reason. "Killing Clara won't bring back that boy," he called. Some faces in the mob wavered, but Royce snarled, "She dies now, Boone. Step aside." Before Boone could answer, Samuel hobbled forward from the barn, placing himself in front of Boone. "Folks, don't do this," the old man pleaded. "Clara tried to help." A few murmurs of doubt rippled through the crowd, but Royce, raw with grief, shoved Samuel and thrust his lit torch forward. The torch clipped Samuel's coat, sending embers across his chest. Samuel stumbled back with a cry. Boone lunged to drag the old man to safety, swatting out a smoldering ember on his shirt. Royce advanced with a roar, drawing his revolver. Boone's eyes went cold. He drew his own gun. A single shot cracked the night. Boone's bullet grazed Royce's hand, knocking the pistol to the dirt. Royce yelped and clutched his bleeding hand. Gasps of shock rippled through the mob at Boone's uncanny speed. Boone leveled his smoking barrel. "Next one's between your eyes," he warned. The mob hesitated, stunned by Boone's resolve. In that taut moment, Clara suddenly rushed from the barn to Boone's side. She could not bear any more bloodshed. "Please," she cried, turning toward her neighbors. "I've only ever tried to help you." A hush fell. Pastor Jim's pistol wavered and lowered, tears spilling down his cheeks at the sight of her. The circle of townsfolk faltered. Many looked ashamed and uncertain now. Suddenly, an old woman's shrill voice rang out from the rear. "Devil's witch!" Before anyone could react, she hurled a kerosene lantern at Clara. The glass smashed at Clara's feet, igniting her skirt in a rush of flame. Clara screamed as fire raced up her dress. Boone lunged. He yanked off his coat and wrapped it around Clara, smothering the flames. Within seconds, the fire was out, leaving Clara shaking and singed, but alive in Boone's arms. Boone rose slowly, fury etched on his face. He fired 3 shots into the air. Crack, 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 each report echoing over the suddenly silent yard. The mob cringed backward, finally jolted from its rage. In the quiet that followed, villagers began dropping their makeshift weapons, faces flooding with remorse. Pastor Jim sank to his knees, sobbing. Axes and pitchforks thudded to the ground alongside coils of unused rope. Not far away, 2 ranch hands gently draped a saddle blanket over Clay's still form. Boone's chest heaved as he surveyed the chastened crowd. The night's madness was ending at last, but as he comforted Clara, a single set of bootsteps echoed in the silence. From the back of the crowd, a lone figure stepped forward, revolver in hand. The townsfolk parted for him in confusion. He wore a trail-worn gray coat and a hat low over his eyes. Something about the man's easy, predatory stride made Boone's blood run cold with recognition. It couldn't be. Boone's heart clenched as the man stepped into the torchlight. It was Clay Miller, his former best friend. A jagged scar cut across Clay's cheek, and hatred burned in his eyes. He kept his revolver trained on Boone, ignoring the stunned townsfolk. "Long time, partner," Clay drawled. "You left me to rot in jail while you ran free." He advanced a step. "You owe me a life, Boone." Boone pushed Clara behind him. Guilt and resolve warred in his chest. "Clay, put the gun down," he urged quietly. But Clay's finger tightened on the trigger. Suddenly, Clay fired. Boone jolted as searing pain tore through his upper arm. He bit back a cry, staggered by the wound. Clara screamed, lunging toward him. Gritting his teeth, Boone raised his revolver one last time. He fired. The shot hit true. Clay's revolver flew from his hand as Boone's bullet pierced his chest. Clay's eyes went wide in shock. He collapsed to the dirt, scarred face slackening. With a final shuddering breath, Clay Miller lay still. A gasp rose from the crowd. Boone swayed on his feet, blood soaking his sleeve. It was over. The black night was finally yielding to the first pale streaks of dawn. Clara rushed to Boone's side, pressing her trembling hands over his bleeding wound. Boone managed a faint, reassuring smile. They had survived the longest night. Together, they turned to face the rising sun, side by side. Subscribe now to Wild West Love Stories for more gripping Western tales of redemption. A gentle breeze blew over the ranch yard as the sun's first rays peaked above the horizon. Townsfolk, who had moments ago been an angry mob, now milled in stunned silence. A few rushed to help Samuel to his feet and brush him off. Deputy Harlan, nursing a bruise on his jaw, quietly holstered his gun. Pitchforks and shotguns lay abandoned on the ground, alongside coils of unused rope. Not far away, 2 ranch hands gently draped a saddle blanket over Clay's still form. Clara stood with Boone, her hand pressed to his blood-soaked shoulder, and watched the neighbors she had feared only minutes before begin to disperse. Some couldn't meet her eyes. Others gave hesitant, shame-faced nods, as if to say, We were wrong. Clara offered each a weak, forgiving smile through her tears. They were all exhausted by hatred, by heartbreak, by regret. In the golden light of morning, Pinewood Falls felt at once familiar and changed forever. Boone winced as he shifted his arm around Clara, drawing her close. They were alive. The worst of the danger had passed, but he knew, and she knew, that the wounds of the night would not fade with the dark. It would take time for this town to heal from what it had nearly done. Boone caught Clara's eye and gave a slight nod. They had survived the nightmare, and now a new day was upon them. As dawn broke over Pinewood Falls, justice had prevailed, but scars of the night's hatred remained. The sun found Boone and Clara alive and together, hopeful that in time their wounded town might find forgiveness and eventual healing.